in 2014, while I was watching clips of the Steven Universe episode Fusion Cuisine, at the bottom of the screen, I saw the screen bug for this little show that goes by the name of Over the Garden Wall, and since then, I've been hearing left and right about the glowing praise that the show would get. Although, something to note about this show before I went in, is that prior to me watching this show for this review, I've actually never seen this show before. Maybe a few scattered clips here and there from reviews, but I didn't get around to watching this show yet at the time, primarily because of the fact that I wasn't really interested, as well as the fact that by the time of November of 2014, I didn't have cable, and I had very limited internet. That was also around the time when I was in a school play, and I was more interested in things like SpongeBob, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2012, and Steven Universe. So I wasn't very interested in watching this show, but that was until I decided to make a giant list of shows that I would consider reviewing for Sean's Network Reviews. One of the first shows on that giant list of shows, besides Middle School Moguls and the Gene Deitch Tom and Jerry shorts, was Over the Garden Wall, and that's because I wanted to get a lot of reviewing material of shows to clear out any possible reviewing materials that people would ask me to review, and sort them out by their episode number, and organize them into two categories from shortest to biggest. So, if there's anyone who was wondering about the shows that you requested, there you go. They're extremely far ahead because they're organized by the amount of episodes they have, and my marathoning schedule is going in a pattern. And I predicted that some people would ask me if I could do a review on some of these shows, like My Life Me, and I told them that it's on the giant list of shows that I will review, and it will be a while until I get to it. But getting back to Over the Garden Wall, I watched this show a few hours after I got done with the script for my review on Kappa Mikey, and the overall results? Wow. This show is amazing. Remember the story that I just told that I didn't watch this show back then and wasn't interested? Well, I now wish I was interested in this show back then, because marathoning the series in preparations for my review on it, I instantly got hooked and interested on what was going to happen next after each episode. For Sean's Network Reviews, I obviously wouldn't put this show at the top of my ranking, because shows like Oban Star Racers, Puka, and OKKO Let's Be Heroes are at the same level of good, but they were a little longer and had more than just 5 half hours worth of episodes to its belt, but I definitely put this show in the top 4 for now. It doesn't beat out the top 3, but it definitely beats out the other 3. What's the concept of this show? This show revolves around 2 kids, the older one named Wirt, and the little brother named Greg. On one particular night during Halloween, Wirt and Greg ended up getting lost in a forest, where they encountered a bunch of strange creatures that aren't what they seem on the surface level. One of these creatures that is actually a threat in this show is this dark shadowy monster named the Beast. And accompanying them is this blue bird named Beatrice, who was originally a human until she accidentally angered a witch that turned her and her family into birds. The concept of this miniseries on the surface level of things does kind of sound simple and straightforward, but as I continued watching, I was completely engaged with the show, and was interested in what was going to happen next. And while the show does have a lot of dark themes and intense situations, it balances these things out with lightheartedness, which already makes this show a step up from Code Lyoko, which, while it was also dark, it could be a little too dark and depressing at times, to a point where there's not enough lightheartedness to soften things up. But Over the Garden Wall has that covered right away. I might as well start things off with the thing that you might notice about this show, and that is the animation. Around the time that this show started airing on Cartoon Network, the shows that Cartoon Network put out didn't really look all that special, as for the most part, they often used something that I'd like to nickname the Bean Mouth style. And no, I'm not calling it the Cal Art style, because that name was coined by John Kay, who used it towards Disney, and used it against other animators who took influence from Disney, not people who were using bean mouths. And each of these shows in particular didn't really do anything special with the backgrounds or outlines to spice things up. The only ones that really did this was The Amazing World of Gumball and Uncle Grandpa, but for the most part, They stuck to one specific look, with shows like Steven Universe, Clarence, and We Bare Bears looking pretty similar to each other. In regards to Over the Garden Wall, while on the surface of things, it does have an art style that looks pretty standard for a Cartoon Network show in the 2010s, and the character designs look pretty basic. Wirt's nose is literally just a triangle. The animation in this show is beautiful. A little known fact about Over the Garden Wall is that the creator of the show, Patrick McHale, initially pitched the show to Cartoon Network in 2006 as a Halloween special, but turned it down initially. But Patrick McHale didn't give up, and decided to stay at Cartoon Network for a couple of years, and while he was there, he was a writer on episodes of The Marvelous and Misadventures of Flapjack and Adventure Time. And from looking at the animation in this miniseries and the writing, I can really tell that Patrick McHale thought through all the nooks and crannies of this series, because the animation in this show is literally a work of art. The show uses a ton of dark colors and gritty surroundings. The show is set in a forest that has a ton of unknown creatures popping up left and right, but they more often than not end up being not what they seem. So it's also a show that is pretty much a showcase of the term, don't judge a book by its cover. The only ones that do seem to be a threat are these pumpkin people and the beast. And the show at times also shows that it has an old rubber hose aesthetic to it, which is fitting since these locations have an old village feeling to it, which also enhances the rubber hose aesthetic to the show. Visually speaking, the best visuals come from the episode Babes in the Wood, because the visuals in Greg's dream is eye-catching, and is pretty much a modern-day equivalent of a rubber hose cartoon, basically being Cuphead before Cuphead even came out. But the show also has a ton of other elements that basically balances out the rubber hose feeling to also make the show feel modern as well. And as I said at the beginning, Over the Garden Wall is a dark show, but it makes sure to also add a bit of lightheartedness to make the show become bearable to watch in one sitting. There are some shows out there that have very little substance that I just stop watching after 1 or 2 episodes and just resume the next day, like Power Players, and there are others that are good, but they could get so heavy that watching 2 episodes is enough to fill me for a day, like Code Lyoko. Over the Garden Wall is one of the first shows that I've watched in a very long time that I was hooked the entire way through, and would wonder what would happen next after watching a specific episode. I'll admit that there are some stumps that the show does run into once in a while. The 5th episode is literally just pointless, and the 9th episode completely distracts from the story after something huge has happened, as well as the fact that the 4th episode spends its time doing nothing, but these episodes are not that bad in the grand scheme of things. The worst that the show could get is the 5th episode, which wastes most of its time with characters derping around in this mansion, with Beatrice being uncharacteristic, and the tone just doesn't fit for a show like Over the Garden Wall, and you would miss nothing if you just skipped to episode 6. I've seen way worse episodes of plenty of shows, even from shows that I consider good. Which brings me into talking about something that makes this show shine, that being the writing and the characters. Right out the gate in the 1st episode, when we meet this crazy guy in the woods who warned Wirt and Greg about the beast, it brings in a lot of suspense about what's going to happen, and then bam, we get a monster that attempts to eat our main characters, which led me to believe that this is the beast that this dude was speaking of, which subverted my expectations when I first saw it, but as it turns out, that the beast is much bigger than they could ever imagine. And then the show continues on as the story unfolds, and we meet a bunch of characters that aren't what they seem. Like for example, in the 3rd episode, that involves this school that doesn't feel right, it's revealed that this school's teacher's father is actually in major financial debt, so Wirt, Greg, and Beatrice put together this fundraiser band to help get as much money as he could to get out of financial debt. And in another episode, the 7th episode, The Ringing of the Bell, from the looks of it, you expect Auntie Whispers, this giant beastly looking woman, to be a threat, as she basically says that she would eat Wirt and Greg when she finds them, but as it turns out, that isn't true. The actual threat is Lorna, because she's possessed by a ghost that Wirt and Greg need to make sure is exorcised out of her body. And as for the characters, it's a case of don't judge a book by its cover, and once you spend a lot of time with them, the more I actually grow to like them. him. Wirt is one of the most relatable characters ever. In the first episode and throughout the miniseries, they establish him as the older sibling to Greg that is basically the opposite of him. Wirt is the more level-headed and responsible one, while Greg is the more naive and happy-go-lucky in nature one. But the writers made sure to not go too far with it to make Wirt look like a jerk, and he's socially awkward instead, which does make him work much better. He's actually a character that I personally relate to a lot, as I'm also someone who is very quiet, as well as someone who stutters in public when I'm in public, and is very shy around a big group of people. Greg is pretty much the SpongeBob of this show, being a character that is generally happy-go-lucky and innocent, but being a calm kind of optimistic character. Still being naive and having a positive outlook on life, but isn't too loud about it. Although, his voice does sound exactly like Lincoln Loud from the Loud House. That's Colin Dean doing the voice for the record. And yes, he also voiced Lincoln Loud. Beatrice is another character that could be considered as the responsible one of the show. However, halfway through the series, she does have imperfections of her own, such as in the 6th episode where it's revealed that she was secretly using Wirt and Greg to help her get back to normal, but she quickly regrets doing it when she started forming a close bond with them. And while I do believe that episode 5 is definitely the weakest episode of the series, it definitely shows that Beatrice does have points where she can be selfish too. And to round out the cast of characters, the Woodsman is one of those characters that you could classify as the crazy guy that basically tries to warn Wirt and Greg about the beast, but in actuality, he tries to lure Wirt and Greg to safety because the beast is after them, and he doesn't want what happened to his daughter to also happen to Wirt and Greg. I'm sorry I didn't have a lot to really say about Over the Garden Wall. This video was definitely the hardest script for me to work on in Sean's network reviews so far, but with a show that only has 10 episodes with 5 half hours worth of material, it does become a little difficult to find a lot to really say about a show without repeating yourself. So my recommendation for Over the Garden Wall is to definitely check this show out if you have the chance to. It's definitely a show to watch if you want something that would make you be at the edge of your seat. Definitely being one of the perfect shows to watch during Halloween. Just be sure to know that episode 5 is pointless, and episode 9 is just a filler episode. This was definitely not a Sean's Network Reviews episode I was expecting to have little to say about. Maybe the next show I'll be reviewing will give me more things to talk about. I don't know, but I'll see you guys next time.
Everything